Players and league sources told her there was more to it than just Parker's performance, that they believe Coach Derek Fisher's decision to pull Parker and several of their other starters was premeditated and influenced by a speech given by GM Penny Toler after their loss in Game 2. Parker was limited to just 3 points in that game, and after that game, Toler entered the Sparks locker room and challenged the team with an obscenity-laced speech that also included several racial epithets, the sources said. One player told Ramona, quote, "You can't say that in 2019. Toler, who is African-American, did not dispute using the N-word, but she stressed she never directed it at her players. In a statement, Toler told Shelburne, quote, "By no means did I call my players the N-word. I'm not saying that I couldn't have used it in a context, but it wasn't directed at any of my players. It is unfortunate I used that word. I shouldn't. Nobody should. I'm not here to defend word by word what I said. I know some of the words that I'm being accused of are embellished. Did I give a speech that I hope would help get our team going? Yes." And now here is WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, who chimed in on this earlier today on Outside the Lines.
I've heard about this. We'll be looking into it as a league. We understand the heat of the moment and that the Sparks lost in the semifinals, but we don't condone that kind of language, and we'll be reviewing it over the next couple of days.
So, I mean, there's a lot to digest there, and I want to set aside Candace Parker's playing time and all of those internal dynamics with Derek Fisher. Penny Toler was a WNBA player. She actually scored the first point in WNBA history as a member of the Sparks. She's been the GM there for 20 years. I don't feel personally qualified to say whether she should or shouldn't be using that kind of language, so I want to open it up to you guys who I think are much more qualified to discuss this.
Yeah, it's a obviously very complicated word with a long, complicated history. Clearly there's a different context when black people use it as opposed to someone who's not black using it. I would say that probably not professional to use that word in a professional environment, but then again, we know that in locker rooms, other words that are not professional are used all the time, right? And one of the words in the story is she called the players MFers. I'm sorry, if you've been in an NBA locker room, you might have heard that word 8 billion times, sometimes endearing, sometimes demeaning, sometimes admiring, but you hear a lot of bad language, is what I'm saying, particularly after a loss. I can't speak for the players or what they felt absorbing that language. The one thing I would say is, generally you want to let your coaches handle the fiery speeches. You got something fiery to say, you communicate that to the coach. You don't, the GM, the front office does not enter the locker room and do that because there's a chain of command when it comes to this.
I agree. I mean, that's why the GM should just go out and get the groceries and let the coach sort of cook it. And,
I mean, did you hear that kind of language directed toward you as a player?
No.
And again, it's not directed toward you,
I've gotten some
you.
verbal abuse from, childhood all the way up through my professional career, but not to that kind of verbiage. And in today's sports, you just can't use those kind of words. And there's going to be some repercussions when you do.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Because we always say, like, oh, back in the old days, they used to say everything. But if you say that no one said that even around you in all the locker rooms you were in, that says something to me.
No, it wouldn't come from a coach.
Right.
It may be some verbiage between some players or something of that nature. And not to even say using the N-word. There's always language that probably shouldn't be said. But things like that, normally, you try to keep it in the locker room and you try to smash it there. Whether it was wrong or right that the GM said that, there should be some kind of fix-it inside the locker room because it's really about the people who's in that circle and it's about the team.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, look, as I said, I know that for someone like me, there is never, ever an acceptable time, ever, period, the end of discussion. I understand also that I don't have, as you say, the history and the context that someone like you has.
Right.
And so it is more complicated. And I think, to your point, Scotty, if the players are telling Ramona, again, they did not put their names next to it, but I understand why they want to talk anonymously.
It's your boss.
That's your boss.
And it's unlike in the NBA where I make a lot much more money than my boss does.
Exactly.
In this sport, it's not quite that way.
I certainly trust Ramona Shelburne and her sourcing on this. And if the players came to her and said, this really bothered me, that's enough for me.
To me, the question is if she hadn't used the N-word, but she'd use every other four-letter word in the book, I think they'd still be upset. Because, again, it's the context. The GM came in and cussed us out after a loss? That's kind of weird. It's different.
We'll see how this story unfolds, and we will be right back after this break. Stick with us. Welcome back to The Jump. According to Sean Devaney of Heavy.com, the Thunder are seeking a draft pick, a young player, and salary relief if you want to go by and make him an offer for Steven Adams.
That is heavy.
One executive said, quote, they set the price too high. That's what you'd expect. And maybe it'll drop as the year goes on. It's tough to take on his contract and give up picks and players. Here's Adams at Media Day chiming in himself. Take a listen.
Look, it ain't this thing where you just read about it and like, oh, that's unfortunate, and then you're just surprised that it happened to you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, if it's happening to someone else, then obviously there's a chance that it might happen to you. Like, that's just, it's common sense, mate.
Translation, if Russell Westbrook could get traded, I could get traded. I know how things work. What should the Thunder do with Steven Adams?
Well, I think they should hold firm with what they're asking for. I think he's one of the most productive centers we have in the game. I think his contract is very reasonable. And it's not like anything's happening in the meanwhile. You might as well. This team is not going to be bad enough to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. That's the thing I think a lot of people are just assuming because they traded a superstar, it's over for them. But they've got Chris Paul. They've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Steven Adams.
Danilo Gallinari. Then they got young guys like Terrence Ferguson, Hamid Diallo. This is a team that could, I'm not saying they're a playoff team, but they're not trash to where playing Steven Adams is the difference between them being the worst team or not. And so they should hold fast, I think, to that asking price.
I would. I think Steven Adams is one of the top bigs in the league, and I think he brings a lot of value. So I wouldn't give him away.
He also brings emotional value for the fans, right? You are talking about a fan base that lost Kevin Durant. We know all the emotional trauma that went on along that. Different situation with losing Russell Westbrook, but my God, I mean, he was their guy for so long. I think being able to have the continuity of having Steven Adams there as they re-embrace Chris Paul, because we know he was there earlier in his career as a New Orleans player seeking shelter.
You know, the other funny thing is you talk about somehow the price will come down, but as the year goes on, what's more likely to happen? Oklahoma City gets desperate for some reason, or somebody has an injury and says, I need a center.
His value goes up.
It goes
now
up.
Westbrook isn't there, so you may see a different player.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely true. And look, I will keep saying it. There will be teams that are very desperate at this year's trade deadline. You can book that. We are back here tomorrow. You can book that too. Same time on ESPN. Thanks for watching. We'll see.